Do you ever feel like you're going crazy in your own family? Like you're constantly walking on eggshells and doubting yourself, and you can't seem to do anything right? You are not alone, and it's not your fault. Today, we're exploring the world of narcissistic family dynamics and how they can mess with your head. But more importantly, how you can break free and reclaim your life. Hey parents, welcome to Fulfillment Therapy. Do you want to raise your kids better and have a stronger marriage? Are you up late at night researching marriage and parenting tools and self-care tips? Do you start each day hoping for deeper connections and less chaos, but it ends with family arguments and going 12 different directions again? My name's Kendra, wife, mom, therapist, and growth enthusiast. It wasn't until I discovered how to fulfill my unmet needs that I was finally able to show up as my best self as a spouse and parent. I realized that by meeting my needs, I could more fully meet the needs of my family with more energy and less resentment. In this podcast, I teach parents skills like boundary setting, prioritizing personal needs, communication, and claiming ownership. Just like my clients, you'll be shocked by the improvement in your marriage, parenting, and personal life when you focus on fulfilling your important unmet needs. Ready to prioritize yourself so you can quit mentally throat punching people? Then grab those earbuds and head outside, and let's walk and talk. Welcome to Fulfillment Therapy, the podcast dedicated to helping parents improve their mental health, wellness, and life fulfillment. I'm your host, Kendra Nielsen, and today we're diving into a challenging topic, dealing with narcissism in loved ones. Today we're going to explore how to recognize narcissistic traits, set those healthy boundaries, and navigate these complex relationships. But before we get started, I just want to remind you to go to fulfillmenttherapy.org/blog if you want to check out all of the information from every podcast. Maybe you want to go back and see the quotes or the steps, the information, whatever it might be. You can access all of it there. You can also get some of that in the show notes. But just know that it's always there at your fingertips if you want to have that additional information at any time. Now back to narcissism. So my husband and I recently have been navigating some complex relationships in our lives, and we highly suspect that some people that we love and interact with are narcissists. And we find ourselves questioning our own sanity after a while, and it really helps to collaborate together and use our backgrounds to really explore what truly is going on here. And it can be very difficult to figure out what is going on. And this happens because there's often belittling and shame and gaslighting, invalidation, and you start to wonder if you are the problem or if it really is the other person. It just messes with your head. It really does take someone else to help you see clearly so you can pull back and establish those better limits, or even potentially create that healthy distance in the relationship. So maybe you're wondering if someone you love is narcissistic and you feel the same way, but you're struggling to trust your judgment anymore. Today, we will answer your biggest questions in simple ways, so get comfortable. And again, no, you are not alone. There's so many people that struggle with this, which is why I want to bring this up today. I'm also doing a podcast episode on some of the big personality disorders because a lot of clients ask me, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? And I'm just going to break it down in super simple ways so you can identify maybe this is why there's so much turmoil in my relationship because this person might have this, or maybe I have this, and it will help you find clarity. So know that is coming. All right, let's talk about narcissism. What is it? This is a personality trait characterized by an excessive need for admiration and this grandiose sense of self-importance and a lack of empathy for others. Now, we could go in a deep dive in this in a lot of ways, but I don't want to quite go that deep. I just want to give you a general understanding of it. But there are 3 types of narcissism that are talked about a little bit more. That's grandiose narcissism, vulnerable narcissism, and malignant narcissism. So the first one is where they appear outwardly confident and they seek attention and they're very charismatic. Vulnerable narcissism is when they're insecure, they're hypersensitive to criticism and prone to feelings of emptiness. Now, malignant narcissism really combines that narcissism with antisocial and aggressive traits. It's a little bit more complicated, so I'm not going to get into that this episode, but you can Google that, you can research that, and see if that maybe applies to your loved one. I'm going to give you a hypothetical example here. Sarah's mother-in-law always dominates family gatherings, and she's constantly talking about her achievements and belittling other people's opinions. This would be like grandiose narcissism. And I won't go into the other ones for now, but I just want to give you a little snapshot of what that could look like. So why do you think certain people become narcissists? How can you recognize narcissistic traits in loved ones? It is often marked by that self-centeredness, where they steer conversations back to themselves and their interests. And the next one is they often have this lack of empathy and this inability to understand or even validate other people's feelings. I don't want to say inability because there is an ability there, but it's a struggle. There's often manipulation where they use guilt or shame or flattery to control other people. And then entitlement. So they expect special treatment and they potentially become angry or reactive in some way when they don't receive it. Again, an imaginary scenario here. So John's brother always expects the family to rearrange holiday plans to accommodate his schedule without considering anyone else's needs or commitments. Ramani Durasula said, narcissists are consumed with maintaining their self-image at the expense of genuine connection with others. So do you know somebody like that that's obsessed with maintaining that self-image, that inflated self, at the expense of connecting or deepening their relationship with other people? Another part that I want to briefly explore is why do people become narcissists and how can we have greater patience for them? Narcissists often have stunted emotional development and they often remain stuck at the age when they experience significant trauma or neglect. Dr. Ramani said this, narcissists are in many ways emotional toddlers in adult bodies. Their emotional growth was arrested at a young age, usually due to childhood trauma or neglect. That's so well said, and that helps me have greater empathy and compassion for people that are struggling with narcissism because they're emotionally stunted. They're emotional toddlers in adult bodies because of something that happened to them that they had no say in. And that makes it easier to be patient while also not allowing inappropriate behavior or unkind behavior. But this emotional maturity manifests as self-centered behavior, poor impulse control, or even lack of empathy. And those are traits typically associated with children or adolescents. They might appear adult-like but their emotional response and coping mechanisms reflect a much younger person and make it challenging for them to form healthy relationships. It does seem like they are stuck in that age because of that childhood trauma. Now, I will caution you, so many times we go into that analyzing mode and we like to point fingers. I encourage you to recognize narcissistic traits in yourself. Now, maybe you're not a true narcissist, but we all have elements of narcissism in ourselves. Don't be so quick to point that finger without looking inwardly yourself. I am reminded of one of my clients right now that definitely is married to a narcissist, and it breaks my heart every time I talk to her because she really questions her sanity. She really doubts herself, and so much of this, as we've been talking, I recognize is a direct result of living with a narcissist. When you're constantly told that your experiences are not real by that loved one, you start to feel like you're losing your grip, your sanity. And it's like being almost in this funhouse maze mirror where you can't trust what you see anymore. You doubt yourself so much. I actually can think of another loved one where it was so subtle and most of us didn't see what was happening, but they really did start to question their sanity a lot and doubt themselves and really feel paranoid a lot because they were told something and it was reinforced over and over that they just did not trust themselves anymore because of living with a narcissist. It can also look like self-doubt spiraling. When you hear for so long that you're the problem on repeat, you really do start to believe it. And your confidence takes that nosedive and you're left wondering if maybe they're right after all. You also develop trust issues, and it's very difficult to make decisions. You second guess everything because you feel that maybe your judgment is faulty. And in the case of my client, she has had every reason to leave her husband because of how terrible he's been in many ways. And she just cries and says, "Why can't I leave him? Like, why can't I do it? I hate myself for not leaving him. There's no reason I can't leave." But then she just says, "I can't. I just can't." And my heart goes out to her. And I told her this. I was like, this indecisiveness, this doubting yourself, this lack of confidence all goes back to living with a narcissist. Like, you are experiencing firsthand the detrimental effects of living with somebody day in and day out that creates this massive self-doubt. And that doesn't mean you don't have power or control moving forward, but you are going to have to manage these inner demons in ways other people don't have to because they haven't lived with that voice telling them that they're wrong or they're the problem or they're faulty and it's all them for years and years. There's another aspect of this. I'm sure you've heard of the term gaslighting, but Robert Stern puts it really well when he talks about gaslighting. Gaslighting is like being stuck in a fog where you can't trust your own compass anymore. Do you feel that way? I know I've felt like this many times in different relationships, but you start to doubt yourself so much that you don't trust that internal compass anymore. You don't trust that intuition or that conscience within you because you've been told for so long that it's wrong, and you start to believe that voice. You've been sitting in that confusion and that lack of confidence for so long that you just don't trust your view of reality anymore. You probably find yourself tiptoeing around, afraid to speak up or make a move without some sort of negative dialogue that inevitably ensues. And it's like the narcissist has rewired your brain, and suddenly you're not sure which way is up anymore. And I see that a lot with my client. Remember, if this is you, it is not your fault. It's the result of some seriously messed up manipulation that happens when you live with a narcissist. And it requires major healing. I would like to say on both ends, but very rarely do I have a narcissist come in my office because they never think they're the problem. How do you set boundaries with narcissistic loved ones? It sounds almost impossible, right? You can, with help often, identify your limits and determine what behaviors you will and won't tolerate, just like anything, although they're going to push back significantly. You can communicate clearly and firmly, but calmly, and be consistent. So enforce your boundaries every time they're crossed. I'm going to give you a quick example here, hypothetical again. So Emma decided to limit her phone calls with her narcissistic sister to once a week and communicated this very assertively with her sister so she understood. There was no room in there to maneuver. And you can also use the gray rock method. My husband has used this many times for the person he interacts with. This is where you minimize emotional reactions to avoid feeding into that narcissistic behavior. Narcissistic people hate this. They want you to react. They want to be able to point the finger to you. They don't want to look internally, and it's not very often that they will. But it's so much easier to manipulate people if there's an emotional reaction. Here's an example. Let's call him Tom. When Tom's father-in-law makes these charge statements or comments, Tom responds with neutral, brief answers to avoid that emotional engagement. And seriously, this is exactly what my husband did recently, and he told me what he was doing. He didn't call it the gray rock method, but as I was researching, I thought, wow, yeah, that is the best way to respond to loved ones that have narcissistic tendencies or are narcissistic themselves, is just don't give them that power that feeds it and will make it intensify even more over time. Another thing to keep in mind is how important it is to maintain your own mental health, because you can see how people living with narcissists would struggle the most. It's incredibly important to practice self-care and do the things that replenish your emotional energy. Seek support. So with my client, she told me, for years, I have not been getting compassion or empathy or validation. What I want most out of therapy is simply validation. And I told her, yeah, you're starving for validation. You're starving for that compassion. And she just cried and she's like, yes, I am. If you know somebody like that, Offer them that compassion, offer them that validation, that empathy, whatever you can do to help them feel like they're not alone and they're not crazy and that they can trust that inner voice, even if it's just for a moment. Remind them of a more adaptive and healthy worldview and self view. And that's going to take time and effort. Another very important thing to do, especially with something so big, is join support groups. There's many online support groups now, and for something like this, it's very subtle. It's essential often to have a support group that can help you identify these things. And those that are in a similar situation will be able to help you see that more. Now, you have to be careful of the support group because some are healthier than others. You don't want one that's too toxic or anything like that, but typically they're pretty effective. It's also important to cultivate those healthy relationships and invest your time and energy into friendships that are mutually supportive. So you do not want to put your energy into another, but a mutual give and take. Also consider family therapy if the narcissistic person is open to it. Hopefully they are, because again, it's a spectrum. They're not going to be like the worst person in the world or the most open person in the world. I did have one client that found a lot of success joining an online support group for children of narcissistic parents. And she found so much comfort and good advice from others that were experiencing similar things or had experienced similar things. So consider that. All right, how do you know if you should limit contact or what that should look like? Or where do you start? First, it's important to explore the impact. How does this relationship affect your mental health and well-being? And always, especially with narcissists, set clear boundaries, like I mentioned before. And if they're consistently violated, consider reducing that contact. Because this happens time and again. I know one client had this happen, even though they were married, there was a lot of pushing boundaries in intimacy, and it was sexual abuse because they were not honoring what they asked, and it made it very toxic and abusive and scary in that intimate setting. Prioritize your family's well-being. Protect your children from harmful narcissistic influences. So if you are allowing narcissists to treat you a certain way, you're modeling to your kids that you don't matter and that they don't need to have boundaries or be assertive themselves. It's really important to model for your kids what is okay behavior, like how others can treat you. And your kids will then learn how to show others that they can treat them. Dr. Henry Cloud teaches so many amazing things about boundaries. He said, sometimes the most caring thing you can do for yourself and your family is to set limits with others. Now let's talk about an example of what that looks like. After years of manipulation and emotional abuse, let's call her Lisa. Lisa decided to limit her contact with her narcissistic mother to protect her own mental health and her children's well-being. So maybe that's something that you can consider doing if it's a very unhealthy relationship. Now, how can you heal and move forward? You can focus on personal growth and invest in your own self-development and your own self-esteem. You can practice forgiveness, not for the narcissist's benefit, but for your own peace of mind. Almost like letting go, because otherwise it just continues to eat at you. And I know this is so much harder than it sounds. And give yourself patience if that takes a little longer than you expect it will. It's also important to redefine relationships and adjust your expectations and find new ways to interact if you're going to maintain contact. I had one client focus on rebuilding his self-confidence in therapy with me, and he really focused on developing new hobbies after years of emotional manipulation by his narcissistic spouse. Consider that yourself if that's you. All right, let's talk about the key takeaways from today's episode. Dealing with narcissistic loved ones is challenging, to say the least. Massive understatement, I know. But with the right tools and support, you really can maintain your well-being and set those healthy boundaries. You can understand those narcissistic traits and understand how they impact your life. You can set and maintain clear boundaries to protect your mental health. You can build a support network and prioritize your self-care. And you can consider limiting contact if that relationship consistently harms your well-being or the well-being of others you care about. My friends, remember that you have the power to shape your relationships and prioritize your mental health. It will take courage, it will take leaning in, It will take challenging those thoughts that tell you are not enough, that it's all your fault, that you're not good enough. It's going to take time. It's going to take self-compassion, but it will come if you lean in and adopt those tiny incremental changes. Thanks for listening, my friends. Until next time, this is Fulfillment Therapy, helping you flourish and create greater passion for life. Don't forget to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever you're listening on so that we can expand our reach and help others out there. Thanks for listening, my friends. I will see you back here in a couple of days. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, chances are someone else would too. Would you take 30 seconds to share this with a friend who's looking for greater family fulfillment? And while you're sharing, tell me what you think about the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It refuels me when I hear this podcast is helping you. No matter what your house or your hair looks like, I'll meet you back here every Monday and Thursday morning for more episodes. Until then.